Restarting Australia's manufacturing. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.heise here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. I thought we'd have a look at this interesting article from the ABC, looking at restarting the manufacturing industry here in Australia. Now, often many people will say Australia needs manufacturing, we've lost our manufacturing. And, well, it's true. The Australian economy, compared to others in the world, lacks complexity. You can see here we're 59th in the world according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity. Now, if I bring up another website, this is the Harvard Atlas. They rank us even worse. I think 93rd the last time I checked it. And their recommendations are that Australia essentially deploys strategies similar to colonial nations. Now, this is because we're a quarry and we're a farm. We're sending raw materials with little processing and complexity as the majority of our exports. We're importing all of the complex goods. And this is simply because it's cheaper. Imported stuff is cheaper. You can see behind me, my desk I have in front of me, right here. The shelves behind me, it's all hand-stained plywood that we bought from a very local manufacturer up in Rocklea here in Brisbane. Australian-made ply. It's much more expensive, much higher quality, better, well, less chance of unknown chemicals in them, like some of the imported product. But this was because we were using it to build furniture, we were putting it in our own architectural practice, and now it's wound up, now it gets turned into my offices. The other side of my computer and the screen, the camera here, I've got a whole series of bookshelves I've built. And it's really good because I can reuse it. But it was much more expensive. We also had high quality door handles made for our office. Made here in Australia, much more expensive than the imported product. Many times I have specified, as an architect, specified Australian made products. And the builders would change them out for imported products. I still remember the story I heard of a developer here in Brisbane. Had a showroom full of all of these wonderful European products for show. And what you'd actually end up getting in your luxury apartment would be a knockoff copied in China. So you can see that this is the problem. It's cheaper. It's cheaper. And I know there are a whole series of ethical questions associated with that. But that's what it comes down to. That's what people want. They want the cheaper thing. So let's have a look at this, because this is an interesting tale, because, well, it shares the journey of a business here in Australia that has had to adapt with changes to manufacturing in this country. And it's not a very big business. We used to specify Koroma because they were one of the few people that still manufactured product here in Australia, toilets and bathroom product. It's disappointing. Rachel even did a tour of their factory in Sydney. Flew her down. And, yeah, that all now is overseas. So let's have a look at this. Australia's manufacturing pivot in a post-illness world as COVID-19 creates a new era for our economy. Does it really? Well, here's the thing. You're getting, I'm getting people who are commenting, Australia needs to do manufacturing, needs to do that, Aussie, nationalism, and then the same people that don't realize they perhaps will need to, take a little bit of a cut to what they receive in payment. We're competing on a global stage, guys. That's the problem. Everyone who's buying will compare your product to one manufactured overseas. I have it in my business. In architecture, there's competitors or there's other firms who will offshore a large portion of the work overseas. Rather than hire an Australian student to train them up and do the drafting, they'll get it done overseas. It's a lot cheaper. It's also a hassle. So almost 30 years ago, Sydney-based business Almec created parts for the gaming industry. A decade later, it built mobile phone antennas for Telstra. Before that work moved to China. Then the factory turned to lighting and small-scale construction supply, until you guessed it, most of that went offshore too. Today, Almec are bespoke sheet metal fabrication business is focused on filling the gaps in the market in the medical and building supplies, shorthand for whatever work it can find. This is small-scale manufacturing in 2020 Australia. And according to the company chief executive, Little Taylor, it's hard work. Here you go, and he's in the middle of the steel fab process. The only way to survive is to keep diversifying, said Miss Taylor, who took over the family business from her father. Recently, we had a point where it was a bit slow, and my dad walked down the road to the Costco supermarket that was getting built and said, "We're a sheet metal company around the corner. Can we supply you?" And we got business out of it. That's the hustle you got to do. That's the hustle you got to do. We're not shrinking, and right now sales are as good as this time last year, but cash flow is tough. It's tough keeping the doors open. This is the thing. Cash flow, and a lot of employees don't understand this, or they don't appreciate it. Cash flow is king. When you get paid every week regularly, no matter what happens, and often if your boss, if you're working for a small business like this and you don't get paid, if the invoices are late, if the builders are paying you late, if the client's paying late, the workers still get paid, either from cash reserves, or you may have to inject more money into it. Some of that money off that mortgage, take an extra loan, put it all in business. Or get a cash advance on the company credit card if you have to keep it going, if it's getting really desperate. So cash flow is a big problem. And this is where changes to directors' responsibility, where they can trade insolvent now. That's what has got me scared more than anything about all of these stimulus changes and this, handouts and money printing. That is going to destroy confidence between businesses. Anyway, back to this. So cash flow is very important. The illness crisis has thrown the spotlight on Australia's manufacturing sector. Well, it's good, it has. And I was invited to join a Facebook group, Australian Made, where people are really making an effort to buy Australian Made, which is good. We need shopping aisles that are just all Australian Made products, or Australian owned. That too. I mean, we make an effort in our family, but though I think we still get our cheese from New Zealand because it's pretty good, and I prefer grass-fed. The sudden restrictions in overseas markets and the extraordinary global demand for products such as medical supplies have laid bare Australia's over-reliance on supply chains out of China. Much has been made of a consortium of Australian manufacturing companies pivoting into critical ventilator production, while a Victorian company, one of the few Australian companies mass-producing PPE, has brought the army in to ramp up production. But this is a tiny, bright spark in a manufacturing sector that has been shrinking for decades. After reaching a height of nearly 30% of GDP in the 60s, manufacturing has since fallen to 6% of GDP. I mean, there you go. I'll have to take a screenshot of that to add to my group of charts. And look at that. And the pandemic is triggering a rethink of how this graph should look. I mean, here you go. We've got jobs where we get custom designs like this that we design, and I had a mate who fabbed it up. We actually had it folding in and out, so he did it quite good. Actually, pressed it in and out. So, and the pandemic is rethinking how we look at the graph, or how it should look. Though playing down any moves towards more protectionist policies, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has talked up promoting Australia's economic sovereignty in a post-COVID-19 world. Well, here's the thing, guys. Protectionist policies sound good, but it's just another tax. It's no different to bailing out any other business that can't compete. I would say government needs to perhaps ease other regulations and burdens placed on our manufacturing industry. Maybe we need to look at making some of the costs that all of the businesses have to put up with reduced. Maybe the burden of being paymaster, now being welfare master with the bloody JobKeeper, collecting all the taxes, doing all the paperwork for the government, maybe that burden needs to be exempt from small business. Maybe our cost base needs to go down. While Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg had promised a re-evaluation of supply chains and a focus on niche manufacturing where Australia does well. Well, what do we do well? What do we do well? I mean, have a look at what we're exporting. Niche manufacturing isn't going to get us to 30%. It's not going to increase the complexity of our economy. Professor Roy Green has heard this before. The manufacturing sector expert and former advisor to the federal government said the manufacturing industry has been withering on the vine for a long time, with paper after paper on how to kick-start the sector, either partially implemented or put in the too hard basket. But he said there had been an obvious transformation of attitude since this pandemic hit. It won't happen overnight, he said, but other countries have done it, and Australia can do it as well. Well, there has to be a willingness in the market to pay a premium for Australian-made. That's what it has to be. Australian-made has to be capable of charging a premium, and people need to be willing to accept it in the market. It's that simple. Would you do it? Let me know in the comments, guys. Do you think people will? Or do you think in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, they'll all forget? Professor Green said it would come from a targeted industry strategy, and Mr. Frydenberg calls a refocus on Australia's comparative advantage. Now, this is when I was mentioning the Atlas of Economic Complexity here, how they're suggesting we use colonial-style strategies. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. We'll click here. We'll look at some of the growth opportunities that they are suggesting for Australia. I mean, we can have a look here. Let's look at the low-hanging fruit. What do we got here? Chemical, wood pulp, soda or sulfate, linseed, mineral wools, and insulating materials. Wow, they're exciting. Let's go to new product opportunities. Diagnostic or laboratory reagents. Here's the product complexity, global growth, and the opportunity gain. So it measures the opportunity for future diversification in entering a product by opening new links to complex products. So these are the things here that they're looking at. Catalytic preparation, so chemicals, diagnostic or laboratory reagents, forklift trucks, mineral wool insulation material, navigation instruments. So let's look at Australia in summary. Australia's complexity has worsened 22 points in the past decade. 7 new products were added in the last 15 years. Australia is expected to grow 2.2% per year over the next 10 years. And strategic bets approach. With few nearby opportunities, growth can be pursued by making longer jumps into strategic areas with future diversification potential. So there you go, guys. Can you see it happening? Where do you think Australia's advantage would lie? One of the issues we have is we're not a very big country. Australia has a small population. If you make it big in the US with an app, you can retire. Over here, you barely make a dent. Anyway, for example, it is ridiculous for us to think we can just flick a switch and start making 90% of all our PPE and forget about China, he said. But what we can do is develop our niche markets and have a strategy that creates clusters of small manufacturing industries we can develop. Well, that's, what would be good for that would be developing special economic zones or regions that allow these businesses to facilitate. Maybe create incentives for people to invest in these areas. They need to create a way for mum and dad Australians to reap the benefit of this, to invest in this, to put a portion of their super towards this. Here's a question. Here's an idea I thought about, and let me know if you think this is a good one. Would you invest in a super fund whose strategic aim is not prioritizing growth, but ensuring food, production, energy assets remain owned by Australians. Would you invest in a super fund that does that? Let me know if you think that'd be a good idea. Because you're still going to make a profit. But if that was the ethical position of the fund, would you go for it? I think there might be a market for it. So the task ahead. A new federal government manufacturing task force has been set up to focus on this very issue. It is part of the commission headed by former Fortescue Metals Chief Executive Nev Power to identify ways to help the economy respond to the illness. The manufacturing element of the task force is led by former Dow Chemicals boss and Donald Trump advisor Andrew Liveris, who recently said Australia had drunk the free trade juice for too long and signalled an end to the era of offshoring. The task force, which is only an advisory panel, has so far signalled a focus on sectors such as food, defence, mining, medical and engineering, and even the space sector. Well, yeah, Australia used to be leading in that sector. One practical example, promoted by many in government, is the lithium sector. Well, yes, there was a new lithium mine that just opened, or processing plant that just opened in Western Australia. Guess which country owns it? Just guess. Australia has an abundance of lithium, but exports the raw product to China to create batteries used in devices such as iPhone and electric car batteries. How incredibly stupid is it for us as a nation to do? Well, yeah, I mean, they keep saying that, but that's all we do. Okay, you can't just bring that up about lithium. That's what we do. There must be money in it, guys. A $135 million lithium battery research centre announced last year is designed to change the process and in turn develop an Australian lithium manufacturing sector. This specific sector focus is backed by Industry Minister Karen Andrews, who told the ABC the pandemic had shown some gaps in our manufacturing abilities and supply chains. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the minister that wants to, push Australia to tiny houses? One of them wanted to, and that was an atrocious idea. But we can't be all things to all people, she said. We need to bring businesses and consumers with us, and we need to get behind the push to diversify our supply chains. We're not going to be able to manufacture everything that we want in Australia, but I want us to be in a position that we can manufacture everything we need. Australian Manufacturing Workers Union National Secretary Paul Bastian said the sector would be critical for Australia to bounce back and called for a more collaborative approach between government, industry and workers. Well, maybe the role of the union needs to be addressed. Maybe we need some more competition. I would argue we need several unions competing to represent workers. They need to, I know they're all cartels, there needs to be competition in the cartels. Because perhaps they've got some role to play in this drastic decline. And if you haven't employed people, read through the EBA for Toyota. Just the complexity that they're adding to the process. I had a friend who, in this business, was looking at getting into union sites. 30% additional costs. I warned him it would be like a cancer running through his business, because then all the additional costs and burdens he would have from just going on those sites would feed into his other projects. It would infect his workers. So maybe they need to look at what their role was. According to workplace expert Alison Pennington, the illness is the nail in the coffin to Australia's existing economic relationships. She's a senior economist at the Australia Institute Centre for Future Work, said it was clear Australia and the world was entering a new era. Is it really? Or is it just going to be a return to previous ways? We've all had the thought that manufacturing is dirty, it's old, we're too slow and expensive, she said. Things will be different now. Next year marks a big year for Almec, its 30th anniversary, and Liz Taylor has one wish for the business's birthday. I hope that the illness crisis sees the government and other companies across the board reassess their supply chains and look locally to fill, if not all, at least some of their orders, she said. It will help protect the manufacturing industry so that it is there when we need it most. She makes a good point. But we'll have to see. we'll have to see. It needs to remain competitive. And the problem is, you're competing with countries that aren't working in the same political system. They've got completely different rules and standards to us. How's it all going to work out? What do you think, guys? What do you think the process should be? Should Australia just adopt more protectionist rules? Should we put more taxes to protect our local businesses and reduce our quality of life? Or should we look at alternative approaches? Try and be a bit smarter, not just do what was done in the past. Maybe a mix. What about the super idea? Would you invest in a fund whose main aim is to protect Australian businesses? As always, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and you want to support us, there are a few ways you can. You can join the channel on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us via our affiliate links at Amazon or eBay or Independent Reserve and Kucoin. You can buy our merch from Teespring or HeiseSays. Send us gold using Gold Pass. You can also support us via PayPal. Thanks everyone. Have a great day and I'll see you later. Bye for now.